So first off, let's talk, Miguel, a little bit about, some signs, right? I mean, obviously you want to check it frequently so that you kind of prevent these types of issues from happening as much as possible. But maybe you can cover a couple of these of, what are some of the signs of things you'll hear customers or yourself see that you'll say, hey man, I think something's happened to our Active Directory.
Well, more often than not, Conrad, we start to see login delays or certain inconsistencies when users log in. Now, the thing here to note is that if it becomes an issue that is not raised up to IT or to management, it just becomes part of the norm. Well, it takes me a minute to change to log into my workstation. Well, it takes me, however long to get an email address generated or a user provisioned. So that's also on the user experience side, whereas they start to become accustomed to what the norm is. Usually we start to see issues with groups not replicating across at the speed that we would want them to. If it's a large organization, we can expect delays, but if it's an organization with 2 sites, we start to see long delay in replication. That's an issue. We start to see login problems, especially for users that have been provisioned recently. Let's assume that we have a new employee. We shouldn't be provisioning accounts an hour before, but sometimes it happens with a business process or for security. They don't have their account till an hour before they start their first day at the job. And they come into the office and they can't log in. That would be a symptom of something's going on with my identity boundary being Active Directory at this point, or at this, topic. The other would be inconsistent behavior. For example, you have certain computers that are getting a policy, certain computers that are not. Those types of things should at least be a warning to the end user, which is seeing this all the time, to be able to raise the issue up to IT, and at that point, they should start looking into this.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because sometimes users just take their IT services as this is the way it is, and it may not have always been that way, right? But somebody out on the site it's just taking a little longer now, and they go, well, I guess it's just the internet is slow or my computer is slow, but the computer is really trying to work to find something out. And the reason we bring these topics up is because, one, these are signs to listen to go, oh, it's probably an AD thing, not so much the workstation thing. And the other is, if your users might be having or experiencing these issues, but if you're not doing your own AD health check or asking us to do it for you, or if it's something we manage for you and we do it ourselves for you, if it's not happening, you may not know that your users are suffering. So let's talk a little bit about, what are some of those areas that you need to look at. Now, some of these things, I think, you could think, well, they're kind of givens, right? But a lot of times, like I'll say, and maybe you could talk a minute about it, Miguel, is that when we go to connect into a customer site, even sometimes they know they have issues, even though they perceive that maybe that there's some problems in there, they either don't know where to look at, or they take for granted the seriousness of what some of those things are. Like, let's say orphaned objects, right? Like, oh yeah, there's some servers in there that are old servers, but we don't use them anymore. So what's the big deal? Well, they used to be domain controllers or something like that. It's a pretty big deal, right? Because the whole infrastructure is built on this kind of this trust of knowledge, right? If DNS says there's a domain controller, there must be a domain controller, which means I can ask it questions. And so if the workstation is logging on, finds that workstation and it doesn't exist, what happens?
Well, first of all, you're going to see delay in log on time. Secondly, you're going to probably start to see issues in the event log. The other problem that you're going to see here, specifically on the topic of orphaned objects, because I think it's an important one to cover a little bit more in depth than a little bit of the other ones. Time series is another big one that we'll touch on. But orphaned objects are usually the most common symptom or the most common cause of Active Directory issues. That being said, is most people, and not, I'm sort of generalizing here, but certain organizations of a certain size, when they decommission a domain controller, it's because it's failing, the hardware gave out, or something that was a catastrophic event took place, and they just decide either not to power it on or just shut it off without doing anything else. That actually leaves a lot of orphaned objects in the metadata, both in the DNS zone, in Active Directory sites and services, and in Active Directory users and computers. Now, the problem is when it starts to replicate. So sort of one thing goes on another, right? A domain controller is trying to replicate to one that doesn't work. It starts to generate errors in the event log, application and security log, and system log. There is a setting in Active Directory that tells us, okay, if you can't reach certain domain control, if you can't reach all the domain controllers that you're configured to replicate to in the organization by X threshold, and that varies, it can be anywhere from 60 days to whatever you set it to. Default, I believe, is 60. Don't quote me on this because it changes from revision of AD. It stops replicating the sysfile volume. It does that to protect itself. So then you have a problem of inconsistent sysfiles across the organization. That will hold your policies, that will hold your objects. That basically is a huge problem because if you want to add another domain controller later, then you're coming into an environment where it's not ideal for you to put this new piece of infrastructure in. The other piece that we're going to talk about is DNS. This is going back to DNS services. Now, we leave this orphaned object there, right? Yeah, we deleted the object from using computers. We deleted the replication partner from all the other sites and services. If we're lucky, that server that went down did not have any master roles, which are the top 5 roles, right? And if it did, then we need to seize them. That's another process altogether. So a lot of these things compound on each other, and going, back into DNS, there's 7 different locations that you need to go to. If you have Active Directory integrated zones, then you need to take a look at that as well. So as you guys can see, it's important, and it's quite one area is very interrelated with the other. So there's a lot of connection points.
So if you have something like a domain controller that just dies and that sucker's not coming back, it's not just as simple as, hey, just delete that server object from AD. There's other elements. That's one thing to kind of consider. But if you don't have that, like I said, it will catch up to you because it is kind of sprinkled around in other locations. So replication was one. So one of the scenarios we talked about was, hey, that I might be able to log on to, when I'm in one office I can log in, but the other office I can't, and that might be a symptom of just replication because if there's in this kind of scenario, there's a domain controller in each area. Just let's say it's one flat forest domain, but they're not replicating all of it or any of it, then that would be kind of a good representation of why that is, and or of that experience, and because things aren't replicating. But it might not be replicating because they're not referencing each other anymore. There's something else that's preventing a replication issue that's happening. And users sometimes just will accept it. Like when they go to the other site, they log in, but because maybe you can't find a domain controller on that one, it'll it could say I'll use cache credentials, or I get in eventually, or I'm prevented from logging on. So all these things kind of come back to things that, from an AD health check perspective, you could find out early, without your users having to contact you. The other one is around DNS servers, DNS services and servers. So, in looking at, the one thing that is the most vital in not just an AD infrastructure, but really all, the world of the internet is today. It's not like it was back in the 80s. You could probably live without DNS a little bit, but everything is built on DNS services, and Active Directory is 100% dependent on DNS services. So, one, because that's, again, that kind of trusted understanding of how things work. Like, I don't know if people know this, it's my little fun fact that I like to bring up, both in lots of different scenarios. I even bring it up in interviews, I'll tell you that, around DNS. Like when your computer turns on, one of its first things it does is says, it has no idea where it is. Its computers are dumb, right? It asks questions and it says, hey, I'm a computer and I belong to this domain, and I'm gonna ask my DNS server, where is this domain? And if I'm at Starbucks, it'll I have no idea where this thing is. Oh, okay, I'm remote. If I'm on-prem and my local DNS or local DHCP points me to the right DNS server, it'll say oh, you're asking for domain controllers and you're at this IP address, so you're at this site, so site to services. Here's your list of 5, available AD controllers that are in your local area, right? 1 or 2 or 5, whatever. The computer then connects and goes, hey, I want to authenticate, because the computer has its own account, so wants to authenticate, and it goes to that list, right? Oh, there's 5 things. First one, can't get connected. Second one, can't get connected. Third one, can't get connected. Fourth one, can't get connected. Fifth one, oh, fifth one works, right? So that's part of the delay, right? Because I got this list and it goes in a round robin order. If none of them connects, it goes, hey man, none available on my site. I got to go, ask for another one. Like, hey, is there another site that can help me out? And so that sometimes is that delay that they have to go through. Once they get a domain controller that works, the workstation, so I'm just talking about PCs, workstation likes to hold on to it and say, and that's what they call logon server, that property, and goes, all right, now I have this thing. So now when a user logs on, like Conrad goes to log on, it'll say, I'm going to log on using the logon server because it worked for me. And then it tries to bind to that one all the time. That's why when that's not working, they say reset the computer, because then the computer goes to this whole through this whole order again. Anyway, so if DNS wasn't functioning right, if it couldn't give me access to that, or somebody changed DHCP to point to Google because they said, man, logons are going to the web browsing through this thing is slow, because remember your most of the times your DNS that you're using for your workstation points to your DCs, as it should. And if that's having problems, then I'll just point it to 888. That would be faster. But now my workstation can never find a domain controller. Anyway, yeah,
you bring up a good point there, Conrad. So in sites and services, there are subnets defined. That's another issue that we sometimes see across our customers.
A lot of times people don't put that in there, right? They're like, what is this? I'll just put them all available to everywhere.
Or have everything in a single site, which, hey, if it works, if you have a reliable high-speed connection permanently across the sites, it may work. You don't want that.
Right.
Primarily because if you have one side of the wire goes down, then it's inconsistent. So a lot of the things we look at. The other thing I wanted to just put on this list here is time services. This is something that we've seen, not new, but it's getting more and more often now. We're seeing that sometimes we have now it's the consumerization of IT, right? I can spin up a domain controller up in Azure with very little knowledge really of any technical background. I want a computer, I want it to be this operating system. There's a couple of other things you need to define, maybe a site-to-site VPN for connectivity. Maybe you already have one there and you're just trying to add another domain controller. Well, funny thing is that there's a certain thing that if a domain controller is out of sync with another for more than 5 minutes, it becomes an issue. So we're seeing people now provision a domain controller. It's provisioned in Azure. By default, it's UTC time. Their local server is California time, Pacific Mountain Central, whatever, and they change one facet of it without changing the other. And time server isn't configured to go to an authoritative data source. PDC role is not working correctly, so it doesn't know where to go. Then you have this split brain personality. If you have Exchange thrown into the mix here on-prem, then you start either sending emails in the future or in the past, so it just becomes a widespread problem.